You're listening to the Last 10th podcast. It's where the rubber meets the road. The Last 10th podcast is a show about running and life, or life as a runner. Join me in conversation with coaches, runners, and athletes from diverse backgrounds. Together, we explore how the practice of running helps to navigate through the many challenges we face on the road of life. The last 10th of a mile is often the longest and hardest part of our journey from the start to the finish. Run your last 10th with me, your host, Coach Pilar. Hey y'all, it's me, your host, Coach Pilar Arthur Sneed. Thanks so much for joining me here for another episode of the Last 10th podcast. The Last 10th podcast has been focused primarily on sharing the stories of diverse runners from diverse backgrounds, women of color, LGBTQ runners, and runners of differing abilities. This has been hugely important work to me because I believe that representation in the sport of running matters. I am presently looking for guests who would like to share their stories on the show. You can leave me a message via the Anchor app and share your story briefly with me, or you can shoot me a message via Instagram and let me know what you might like to talk about. I'd love to hear from you. For today, I am super excited to welcome Ayako Sawanobori to the show. We are going to be talking about trail running, outdoor adventuring, and transitions from one space in sports to another. I hope that you will enjoy this conversation as much as I did. How about if we get started? Hey, y'all, it's me, your host, Coach Pilar Arthur Sneed. Thanks so much for joining me here for another episode of the Last 10th podcast. You know, and I know that I'm going to say it because I literally say it every single week, but I am so excited to be here today with my next guest. And I say it in all honesty. I really do get super excited. So this week, I am here with a new friend. We've met as a part of a team of BIPOC runners who are going to head out and tackle some races over the course of 2022. So I have with me today Ayako Sawanobori. I am super excited to have her on the show. Ayako is a Japanese American runner. She's an outdoor adventurer, a food lover, which, okay, perfect. Love that. And also a not-for-profit professional living in San Francisco. She happened to start her athletic career as a competitive gymnast. So you've got great spatial and body awareness. Okay, that's awesome. But a spine injury forced her to early retirement. But recovery was a place where she was able to find running, and she did some track and field. And then after college, she found distance running. And one of the things that I feel like connects us is that we both have a passion for diversity and representation in outdoor spaces. So, Ayako, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Good morning. Happy to be here and good to see you again.
Excellent. So, where I usually like to start, you know, the bios are one thing, but it's really great if you would tell me a little bit more about you, and you can share anything that you like, anything at all.
Sure. Yeah, like you mentioned, I was a gymnast. I started when I was 4.5, and I did that for 9 years. So when I was a teenager, I tumbled backwards head first off the balance beam during practice, and that resulted in a spine injury, and wasn't able to go back to the sport. I tried, but so when I entered high school, I missed competitive sports so much, and track and field was like the default sport because I never learned how to kick a ball, how to catch a ball. Gymnastic is really all consuming. And so the only sport I ever did before running. And so, my PE coach happened to be the head track and field coach. So tried out, got on the varsity team, and then ended up being a sprinter through college. And so, yeah, I didn't plan on being a runner at all. It was just kind of my fallback sport, which I ended up falling in love with. So,
So
yeah,
I'm terrible with math. So 4 years old, you started doing gymnastics. So when you were 13 is when you had your accident. Can you tell me a little bit about, I think people often will discount the feelings of young people, right? Like, it's fine. You're going to be fine. You're resilient. You'll get over it. Right. But I would imagine that this was a really challenging time because you had done something for so long, and you had probably envisioned yourself as doing this, perhaps, competitively and professionally. So can you tell me a little bit about that experience of, going from competing and then to not, and how that was for you?
Yeah. I think as a youth, like gymnastics was my entire identity. Like I'm talking 25 hours a week of practice, after school, and, not going to sleepovers and not being able to hang out with friends. It was, school's out, in the car. I eat dinner in the car on the way home after practice. Like that was my whole identity. Everyone at school knew me as the gymnast. And so when that ended, not only did I have to do a lot of pain management and rehab, to get my body back in order, but I just lost such a huge chunk of my passion and how I identified as a gymnast. And so the end of middle school and entering into high school was definitely, tough on me mentally, because I really had to give up, something that I loved. And it was, bless my parents, but they knew when I got hurt that I wasn't going back to the sport. But in my head, I was like, all right, I'm going to get healthy again, and I'm going to get back to the sport. And so maybe like a year, I don't know how many months or a year later, my mom drove me to the gym, and she's like, give it a try. And I did like a few hours there, and I was like, oh, you're right, I can't do this again. I remember like sobbing in the car, writing a letter to my coach, and like had my mom give the letter to the coach. I couldn't even go in there to like quit in person.
Sure.
And so thankfully, the track and field thing got started pretty quickly. I was always a good runner, as a kid, but just, kind of losing a big part of me and then having to start fresh in a new sport. Start as a 14-year-old,
Making a pivot.
Yeah. But, I excelled in track and field in high school. And I think that just really lit a new fire, So
absolutely.
And I ended up running, through college at a D3 school back east. And, I felt like I found my new space, which is great.
Awesome.
I don't know what would have happened in the rest of my teen years had I not found track and field, because, I identified as an athlete, and that was that was me.
Right.
I needed that. I really needed
that. Absolutely. To be able to have something that you could shift into, and then also to be able to have someone who knew you as an athlete in the sport of gymnastics, but then was able to say, okay, we can transition to this other sport, to have that same person, because they know what your strengths and what your weaknesses are, and know like how to kind of motivate you through. So awesome. That's awesome. So now you've made this transition into track and field as a young person. You were a sprinter. Wow. Okay. So So I come to sports as an old person. So I don't have a lot of like knowledge of like what goes into the sport, into the sport of sprinting. But are there particular distances that you would run as a sprinter? I'm assuming 200, 100.
Yeah, I think, as a gymnast, you have a lot of explosive speed and power. And so that's kind of what I stuck with. And so, in high school and college, I did the 100, 200, 400. I think the 400 was my main event.
Mm-hmm.
And then the relays, the 4x100, 4x400. 4x400 is by far my favorite race. It's
really
so painful because it's at the end of the track meet, but I love it.
Yeah.
Love, hate.
Sure.
But yeah, so I was mostly a quarter miler. So, it's funny now that I'm in my 30s and I'm running for hours, but my longest race used to be under a minute. And now I'm like paying to run for hours. But here we are.
The frequent conundrum of the distance runner. What? I paid to do what? What?
Yeah, I know. I get that from my non-runner friends a lot. But yeah, I really enjoyed sprinting, and I still got to kind of enjoy that explosive power that I used to have, in gymnastics, just in a different way.
Absolutely.
And I'm really glad I ended up doing that in college, because my track and field teammates and coach from college are, they're going to be lifelong friends.
Wow.
And it really helped me hang in there when I was, 3,000 miles from home and experiencing living in the snow for the first time.
Okay. So you mentioned going to school on the East Coast. So East Coast, West Coast, now you're in San Francisco. So tell me a little bit about that, the bi-coastal.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was a toddler, when my family and I moved from Japan, so we settled in LA. I grew up in LA. And then, applied to like 2 out-of-state schools for college. And I ended up going as far away from home as I can.
That's pretty far.
Yep. So I went from LA to Boston.
Wow.
And the original plan was that I would stay there for the 4 years of college and move back to the West Coast. But just total coincidence, both of my sisters ended up in Massachusetts. And so I ended up living there for like 9.5 years.
Wow.
Or as I like to say, I was there for 9 winters.
Sure.
And then, all the sisters eventually kind of trickled back out of Massachusetts. And I was there for so long, but I never quite felt home there. And so I made my way back to the West Coast when I had an opportunity with my old job.
Sure.
And settled in San Francisco, which was, again, like nowhere in my plans, but I ended up loving it here. They have all the things that I love. And there's some great running trails out here. So that's, it was in San Francisco that I first started doing long distance running.
Oh, okay. So now you've graduated from college, and, tell me a little bit more about like your journey into, hiking and just outdoors and endurance running and like all of it.
Yeah. So I got my first taste of the outdoors, and kind of maybe longer distance running is I did 1 year of cross country in high school, just to help with my endurance. And the cross country coach in high school was a big outdoors guy, and he would just, he and his wife would take the van and we'd all go out to the trails and we'd go hiking. And I camped for the first time ever when I was with my cross country team. So that was like, I got a little taste of that as a teenager. And then when I moved back to San Francisco, when I had so much great access to the outdoors, whether it's Tahoe or Yosemite or pretty much anywhere in California, I kind of got reunited with the outdoors when I moved back west. But I've always enjoyed it. I mean, my family, we weren't like the most outdoorsy type, but we go on the hikes and we like the beach and all of that. And then what else? How did I get into the distance running? Well, I will say after graduating from college, I was so burnt out with anything running. I mean, it's, I ended up doing 4 indoor track seasons and 3 outdoor track seasons in college. I did take one season off, but I didn't want anything to do with running when I graduated. And then a couple years later, I would do like a 5K, the St. Patrick's Day 5K or something like that. Did a little bit of that. And then when I moved to California, I signed up for my first half marathon, fundraising for an organization called Girls on the Run.
Yeah.
And so I've coached for them for the last 9 years. But I found the organization when I first moved here. And I became a founding member of their associate board and then did the fundraising thing. So that was my first half marathon. I fundraised
for them for my first half marathon as well.
Oh, you did?
I
awesome.
did. I did.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And, it was for a good cause. And that was, I think that was the beginning of my distance running journey. And then in 2013, I was caring for my mother. She had cancer and she passed away in the spring of 2013. And I like lost all motivation. I think I went like 9 months without breaking a sweat. I kid you not, Pilar. I didn't have any energy. I remember people were like, you are a very active person. Like this isn't right. And so my boss at the time was like, I remember one day he was like, you need to start running again. That's what you do. And I'm like, okay. Like kind of easier said than done because I'm grieving and depressed and tired.
Sure.
And so he signed up for my first marathon with me, which was Boston 2014. So it was the year after the bombing. It was the year after my mom passed, and we were able to get 2 bibs through work. Wow. And so we were out here in California, and our company is Boston based, and so we both had moved back west.
Yeah.
And so we trained, and I did my first marathon April 2014, and very, very fortunate that my first one was Boston.
What an introduction into the world of marathoning, and then also a way to kind of bring you back into the sport.
Yeah. And so I think that the week of the race was the week of the 1-year anniversary of my mother's passing.
Wow.
And it was emotional. It was physically painful. There were a lot of moments where I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this is crazy. But I mean, the Boston Marathon, it has just a different energy. Like that vibe on race day is hard to compare with anything else. And having lived in Boston, I've every year I watched, and I'm, oh my gosh, I'm on the course. And my family came out to see me before and after. My best friend from LA flew out to greet me at the finish line. Like it was really, really meaningful. And I fundraised for that race as well. And for Girls on the Run again, actually. That was, I don't know. I still don't think I like distance running, but I still do it. But I think it's just like the energy you get from the people around you and the camaraderie of the running community. Like that part really stuck with me. And so I keep signing up for these damn marathons.
That's very funny. You either hear from people that they absolutely 100%, they're just I love it, or they hate it. And then there's the middle part, which is the love-hate thing. I'm probably closer to the side of I love it, but at the same time, every race, I literally want to quit. In the middle of every race, I'm just I should just quit right now. I should. Why did I sign up to do that?
Oh yeah, no, it's a love hate. This is probably such an insulting comparison, but I remember when my older sister has 3 kids, and she was saying how like childbirth is so painful. And then it's like you black out and you forget about it. And then you decide to have another. And I was like, I don't have a child, but that's how I feel about marathons. I'm like, in the moment, I'm like, what? Why did you decide to do this? This is a bad idea. It's painful. You are willingly putting your body in pain and you
through
want to
torture and all of this. Like what? It's just like, yes, and the training
Yeah.
process and just like all of it, the whole entire, the whole entire
month of it.
thing.
And then like 4 days after the race, I'm like eating a slice of pizza, looking up the next race.
Oh, look at that. Wow. Oh my goodness. The London Lottery is open next week.
Exactly.
I should totally apply.
I know. And they get you every time. And then it's like, I forgot how painful they are.
Something in the brain happens.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I tell you, there's that, I don't know, there's some energy that's like beaming out there when you're at a marathon.
It's so true. So true.
Like I'm not a fast marathoner whatsoever. I just run to finish. I've never really had a goal time. When I see friends and family on the course, I literally hop out for like 4 minutes, giving them taking pictures. And I remember in the Boston Marathon, I was at like mile 23. I saw my coworkers and I'm like jumping up and down, hugging them, taking photos. And they're like, the race is still going on. And I was like, yeah,
it's fine. It's fine. The course will be back. I'll be back on in a minute.
My goal is always to just finish and try to have fun. And my older sister, who's definitely not a runner, every like race photo she's seen or even post marathon photo, she's like, how are you smiling? And I'm like, I make sure I go slow enough that I'm still having fun and that I can still smile. Like, one of these days I might have a goal time, but for now I just want to have fun.
I understand.
I'm not a serious marathoner. I'm not chasing a BQ or anything like that. So
I understand. Well, you've already done it, so you don't need to.
There you go.
That was your first one. You're done. It's all you're good.
I got Boston covered. So
got that out of the way. Yeah.
But the cool thing with the timing of Boston, so again, it was the first year after the marathon bombing, which was just so horrific. And I always often think about my mom passed away 2 days before the 2013 Boston marathon bombing, and normally I would be there. Like I would be at the race. 2012, we were at the site of one of the explosions, and I remember I was there with a couple of my track teammates, and we're right at the finish line. And my dad's like, your mom was making sure you weren't there. So I was in New Jersey helping my parents, and so there was a lot of meaning behind that first marathon for me in April 2014. And my family was surprisingly really excited about me running 26 miles. And so it became an annual tradition. And so every spring since 2014, I would run a marathon, and my dad would travel from wherever to cheer me on. So it became this really cool father-daughter tradition, in honor of my mom, and my dad is really into it now.
That's
and
wonderful.
I don't know how to stop him from getting excited about it, because I'm like, for me, it's a lot of training and taking time off for travel and racing. But my dad is so into it. You should treasure
that. My family has absolutely zero interest in any of my running exploits. They have zero interest. They just don't care. I wish they would. But they don't.
I don't think my family gets it, but they support me and they enjoy, they enjoy watching me. So far, year 2 was Paris. Year 3 was Tokyo, I think.
What?
I know. We got to talk about that. And then
I just need to get there.
We're going to get you there. It's going to happen, Pilar. And then I did, Tokyo, Rome. I did Big Sur. the LA Marathon. So right before, I'm missing something, but yeah, 2020, March 2020 was the last marathon I did
Yes.
right before the pandemic hit. Like,
Yes. I remember when
yeah, my
folks
jobs.
were heading out to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just
Wow.
remember like the day or two before, we're like, are they going to cancel it? Are they not going to cancel it? Tokyo had already canceled in February.
Yes.
Um, and so my dad came out for that. And, and then this pandemic has really made things challenging. So I haven't done another one since,
Yes.
but new year, who knows what'll
Yeah. New
happen.
year, new year,
Um,
new time. What do
yeah.
you have? What do you have planned in this coming year in terms of races? So, what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about tackling?
Yeah, so I've been doing more trail racing
Mm-hmm.
and less road racing
Mm-hmm.
because it turns out that trail racing is hiking and running. Like, how
That's
did I
right.
not
That's
say
right.
this earlier? Because I love running and I love hiking, but no, trail racing is kind of what I'm focusing on. I did the Trail Sisters half marathon in Colorado last year. Um, I was signed up for my first ultra, but then I got COVID. So
Oh man.
I had to skip that one in November.
Yeah.
I have a 30K later this month,
Mm-hmm.
and then my first ultra, a 50K in March. Both
Mm-hmm.
are kind of up in the air. I'm still trying to get like health clearance.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up being pretty sick from COVID, and so
Mm-hmm.
making sure my heart is okay.
Absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely.
going through the process and seeing a cardiologist. But
Absolutely.
if all goes well, I'm like, maybe I just need a little more time to train. I'm trying not to
Yes.
beat myself up over this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
very stubborn. So I'm like, yeah, I'm still going to run a 50K in March. And some people are like, should you?
Like maybe you should wait. Yeah, I know. I get it. I
Yeah. So
totally get
it's
that.
a little TBD, but I do have, I have two registrations already booked.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of all of 2022, I just want to tackle my first ultra. And
Absolutely.
so 50K
Absolutely.
somewhere in there in 2022
Awesome.
is my goal.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about um, diversity in running, and I would really love to hear a little bit more about your experiences being a Japanese American woman, um, maybe across the board, right? Like in competing in gymnastics and competing in track and field, then also making a transition into endurance running. I know that for myself, when I first started running where I live, like I was always just like, okay, do Black people, do they run? I mean, is anybody here? And so it took a while for me to be able to find a collective of
Mhm.
people of color where I could start to feel a little more comfortable. So talk to me a little bit about your experiences.
Yeah, I think, in general, they don't think of Asian Americans being like good athletes.
Mm,
And then there's a lot of stereotypes, right? Like,
mm,
people were like, oh, well, there are a lot of Black runners, and they all
mm,
assume that you have to be a sprinter,
mm-hmm,
and it's like, no, that's not what we mean.
mm-hmm,
I really, seeing diversity and representation in all areas of the sport.
mm-hmm,
So, I think growing up, my parents were super supportive.
mm-hmm,
I sometimes feel like they were a rarity in terms of being
mm-hmm,
a Japanese parent, but
mm-hmm,
they knew I loved gymnastics, and
mm-hmm,
they saw that I was good at it, and so
mm-hmm,
they were super supportive. Um, where I grew up in LA, it's very diverse, and
mm-hmm,
so I was used to not seeing as many white faces, and so I think I was in this little bubble where especially my track and field teammates were super diverse.
mm-hmm,
And so that was what I was used to.
mm-hmm. It was the
Um,
reverse. It was the reverse way where
yeah,
you're like, wow, this is the world.
yeah, yeah. And
And then
then
you go and you're like, wait, what
well,
is
then I go to
this?
Boston, which to me was was much whiter than I was used to growing up in LA. And it was a little bit different. A lot of my teammates were white, or they don't they don't necessarily think of a petite Asian woman as a sprinter. But I still was not super bothered by it because my teammates were fairly diverse still, and I just kind of brushed it off as like, I'm in a new environment. I grew up in the West Coast, and I was like, oh, maybe just the Northeast is less diverse. Like it is what it is, kind of thing. But I noticed it more when I got into distance running, and also when I got into like outdoors stuff. That to me felt, I don't know if it's just lack of access or if it's just, I think it's a combination of things, but I just didn't see a lot of, Asian American folks out doing trail running or, climbing or surfing or any of the stuff that I enjoy doing. I think it's definitely gotten better. There's this movement, over the last few years, but people still like, when I'm outdoors, I also like to do it by myself, but people assume I came off like a big tour bus. He's there.
Like, do you see any tour buses around here?
And like they just assume like, oh, there's an Asian in a national park. They came off of one of those tour buses. And I'm like, no, I got my rental Jeep. I'm here by myself.
That's right.
Like,
that's right.
Doing my thing because I'm capable,
Yes.
So I've definitely gotten some of that where people assume I shouldn't be out there. I shouldn't be out there by myself. I'm out there. Am I with a man? Like, people look at me differently if I'm with like a white man. And,
oh, absolutely. Thanks for listening. The Last 10th podcast is a production of The Mindful Run Coaching and Training, and me, your host, Coach Pilar, with the help of great tools here on Anchor. If you like the show, remember you can listen on your desktop at anchor.fm. You can also listen on platforms like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Spotify, and so many more. Now you can also view episodes on my new YouTube channel. Please feel free to leave me a message. I'd really love to hear your thoughts and feedback on the show, or even ideas for future guests. Don't forget to leave your thoughtful and positive review on Apple Podcasts. Apple makes it possible for so many people to find and listen to the show. Your reviews will help. Finally, if you really appreciate and love the stories and interviews that I've been sharing, please consider supporting the show. Click support on anchor.fm or in the Anchor app. A portion of the proceeds will always benefit my charity of choice.
I did like this amazing and fun, like Pacific Northwest camping car trip by myself for like 11 days. And multiple times there are instances where people talk to me as if I'm there with another person. And even at places like gas stations, like they see all my gear in the back and they're like, oh, where are you guys headed? And I'm like, and I don't want to advertise that like, hey, I'm out here by myself, right. But it just like don't make me feel incapable of, of being out there. So that started to bother me. Yeah.
We talked about this briefly when we had the conversation with Dirtbag Runners, and like, I get it. I get what you're saying, right? Like you want to be seen as, you want to be, well, number one, you want to be seen as being a human being who is capable of doing all the things that the rest of human beings are capable of doing. That's the first thing. But also you want to be seen as being someone who is also capable of traversing in the outdoors. Like if you can do it, I can do it too, right? On the flip side of that, for me, and kind of like talking about the access thing, I don't think like lack of access, like that phrase makes it seem like, oh, like it brings to mind like a lot of things. Oh, like either you don't have a car, or you don't have the money, or you know, whatever those kinds of barriers are, when really it's sometimes it just surmounts to like, it's 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 50 minutes from my house to get to XYZ place. So I have to block out this amount of time. And then in contrast to like the West Coast, when you talk about, you see a lot of people who look like you out there on the trail. In the Northeast, you don't necessarily see a lot of people who look like you. So while I am capable, I'm also in fear of the fact that I, as a person of color, might go into this space and receive negative things that happen to me because I'm in this space, right?
Yeah. And also, like, standing out kind of sucks. Like I've started to notice that, you know, in different, whether it's at a race or a running group. Like I've had a hard time finding a running group that isn't 85% white, you know, and I'm like, do you have to be tall, skinny, and white to be in a, you know, long distance running crew? So I've definitely been more intentional in seeking out, you know, Carolyn Sue of Diverse We Run, I think I said to her, like, I want the trails to be more colorful.
Absolutely.
I don't mean the trees.
I totally understand. I totally understand.
You know, so a lot of the gatherings I've gone to, or the races, especially in trail running, it's been mostly white. And like, I just want to be, it doesn't, I think at this point in my life, and I feel a little bit more secure. So I'm like, it doesn't scare me off, but it does make me motivated to be there and like, don't shrink myself because
absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so, but that took a lot of years of like feeling like, ooh, I'm the only one that looks like this, or ooh, I'm the, you know.
Sure.
So I've gotten over that. And so now, if anything, like I have the mentality of like, be out there because there's space for you there, you belong there, and like be loud.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I think that mentality has shifted, but I still, especially in the trail running scene, it seems mostly white. And you know, I was talking with someone, this white woman, about what safety means, and she had a different concept of safety than a lot of, you know, what a lot of like BIPOC folks experience. And I thought that was really interesting. It wasn't right. It just didn't occur to her, because I think as a woman, as women, we understand what safety means in that regard, but also there's that like psychological safety of belonging and all of that, right? And so, and not being, you know, not dealing with microaggressions, or not, you know, not dealing with stereotypes. And so I was explaining to her that there's psychological and emotional safety as well. And so I thought that for me, like, that was a really meaningful conversation for a white woman in that space to really listen to me. And understand that there's a lot that she doesn't understand.
Oh, absolutely.
So these types of conversations are happening more and more, and I feel, you know, I feel hopeful. But I think there's also still a big need for
absolutely. I mean, I'm really glad that you brought that up because my mind was kind of going there as well, and kind of circling back to your, talking about showing up in a space, being perceived as, and being seen as capable of doing, something. You're being able to stand your ground and say, yeah, I'm here, but also not like advertising for folks like, yes, I'm here by myself, so you can follow me to my campsite. right. Like, having that happen. Some of that comes from being able to, over the course of a certain period of time, accumulate certain knowledge about what it is to do the thing that you do. And talking about the access piece, for me, when we're talking about trail running, okay, if you go on a 3-mile trail run, okay, you really don't, that's not going to be that much different than if you go on a 3-mile run on the roads. Not too much different. But 25 miles or 26 miles on a trail, or 50 miles or 30 miles, is a little bit different and a little bit of a bigger undertaking than 3 miles. And there are things that you need to know that you cannot assume that someone just knows it. That I think that there are a lot of assumptions that happen in the space of trail running where people are just like, we're not going to talk about that because everybody just knows that. And you're like, for me, I'm showing up into these spaces and I'm like, okay, and talking about safety, like I'm bringing all this back around again. Like we're talking about psychological safety. So first, I have to show up into a space that I know is predominantly white. Mm-hmm. I don't feel safe because I know that people are going to be like, oh, look at you, you're here, blah, 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 blah. So I got to worry about that. I have to worry about all the logistics of getting to this place. That's a whole nother level of challenge. Then I get there, but I don't know all of the insider knowledge that comes with being in that space. But you've made the assumption that I should, but you're also, in a certain sense, there's a certain sense of microaggression because it's shared between all the people who are already a part of this group, but you're not going to share it with me.
Yeah.
So your level of safety and the feeling of safety that you have is
yeah,
it's like this much.
And I think that's why I get frustrated when people people say, well, the outdoors are for everyone, or like running is for everyone. No one is like gatekeeping, or but
people are absolutely 100% gatekeeping.
There are a lot of barriers for people of color to enter spaces and sports and whatever else that isn't already well represented by their community. And but I've seen that on a lot of like articles that talk about diversity in running, and there are a lot of, I'm just gonna say it, there are a lot of white folks who says like, no, not at all, like running is the most inclusive sport, anybody can do it. And they're not understanding the other things that come with stepping into a space where you're not well represented.
Absolutely. So
yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, there's this, like when people call people trailblazers, it sounds great, but it's really hard to blaze trails.
It is absolutely hard to blaze a trail.
Or is it a, man, that sucks, you have to be a trailblazer? But no,
you're the one who gets to go out and you get to figure it out, because you get to go into the space and figure out you get to be the one to reverse engineer what it takes to get to a start line. And for me, especially in trail running and especially in ultra trail running, it's really about that. Like, I feel like for myself, for what I'm trying to accomplish in 2022, I'm having to reverse engineer what it means to get to an ultra trail running space. Because people who I'm talking to are like, oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's cool. You'll be fine. I'm like, okay, but like, I've literally never done this before. I've literally never done it before. So can you give me something? Have you got anything besides it's going to be fine? Just show up. You'll be great. Maybe I will, But what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to have a certain sense of comfort and that feeling of safety, which goes beyond the feeling of, is my body going to be harmed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because my body being harmed is like, my body is being harmed every time I set foot on the road and I run. I'm not necessarily worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm worried about is I'm worried about showing up into a space where, like, psychologically, I'm dealing with this every day. I don't want to have to deal with this when I show up here. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And that's where I would, I think any space, if they're really intentional about bringing folks in, right? Not just saying it's there. It's there, it's available if you want it, but really being intentional about bringing diversity in, and that welcome, like at least make me feel welcome.
Got it.
I started doing this probably not healthy thing, but if I notice I'm in a space that's really white, I literally start counting how many people of color there are. I'm like,
I probably do the same thing. I'm like, oh, look,
do that.
And there.
I'm like,
and there.
There's one Asian, but there's another Asian person. Like, why am I counting? But it also just makes me realize that, like, I'm in a space that is predominantly white, and like I'm having to pick out and notice other people that look like me or other people of color. And it's a very small percentage, and I was like, why, just stop counting. Good for you.
There's sort of like, when I was a kid, I never really understood why, this was like a thing, but now I understand it, right? So like my family and I would go to some place where I should preface this by saying that where my family lives and where I grew up was already predominantly white, right? So like I was the only Black person in my school for as long as I could remember, the only one. So like living with microaggressions was like my life. But I would say that if we would go into spaces that were even more predominantly white, there was like an unspoken rule amongst Black people. If you're walking down the street, you give a little wave, you give a little nod. And as a kid, I never really understood that. But now as an adult, I totally get that. I get it, because it's an acknowledgement of like, I see you here in this space. Some people are not so much about it because they're just like, yeah, I see you. But there's like a comedy bit like where it's like, I'm the Black person here.
Like, this is backwards.
This is my space. Get out. Some people are not about it, but I totally get that acknowledgement, that acknowledgement piece, because it helps you to feel not so alone within a particular space. Yeah.
It's so weird when we as like the minority group need to be like the friendlier ones, and I don't know, like there's expectation that we have to do a little extra to be there.
Yes.
Which that definitely needs to change.
We have to contort ourselves to make sure that the white people don't feel threatened by the fact that we're there. I will tell you that, as you have said, in my getting older years, I'm not really willing to do that. I'm like, look, I'm not here to be nice to you because I'm Black. It's just like right. If I'm feeling like being nice, being nice, quote unquote, then I'm going to do that. But if I'm not feeling like being it, then I'm just not. Like, this is not my job. My job is not to make you feel comfortable with my Blackness, because I am what I am.
Yep.
And you do your own work.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're allowed to exist, except, society has told us that we need to mold into a certain way. I mean, like English is my second language. I grew up in a very culturally Japanese household, even though I was really young when I moved here. And I remember like, I had so many like identity crisis moments as a kid. I used to ask my parents, like, I used to ask my parents if I'm allowed to say the flag salute, or am I a traitor to Japan?
Oh, wow.
My parents were like, "You're 8 years old. Like, why are you even thinking about this?" But I remember
about it
being in third grade, and we used to have to do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag thing, and I was like, "Am I allowed to say it out loud?"
Right.
They're like,
right.
Like,
I get it.
You can be both, right? You can be black and a runner, and you can be, you know, an Asian athlete, and you can be Japanese and American. And,
absolutely.
But I think the fitting in part of, like, you know, I mean, just even the little things that, I guess it isn't that little when you're in the moment, but, you know, school lunches. All I ever wanted as a kid was to bring a brown paper bag with a sandwich and an apple.
Yes.
And I had brought my bento box with probably stinky foods. And, you know, as an elementary school kid, or, you know, I was just like so embarrassed. And I had to, again, it's that whole shrinking yourself to just like blend in. The blending in part, I just don't believe in anymore. I'm like we were just talking about, right? Like, we're allowed to show up as ourselves and exist. And just being ourselves. But I used to just be like, "Mom, can I bring a sandwich to school?" And I don't think I ever did bring a sandwich to school. You know, like my mom was like, "This is the food we eat.
This is what we eat, dear. I'm sorry. This is the food you get.
Like, that's what I cook. And you like this food?"
That's right.
You go to the school, you know, lunch table, and you don't like this food. And you know, they knew what's up, but like, and I'm in hindsight, I'm appreciative that my parents were like, do not minimize your Japanese-ness. Like, just own it. But as a kid, you know, with other kids eating their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, like, that's all I ever wanted.
I get it. Common theme. I think that those are common themes for children of immigrants. Being an immigrant coming to the country, it's a common theme. I think if you are a person of color who exists in predominantly white environments, I know for myself that I had a moment in grade school where I realized, like, you would think that it would be obvious, but I realized, oh, snap, I'm Black, right? Like, I'm not like these people. They're not like me. I'm not like them. I am a Black person. It was like it's like a coming into yourself moment. Now, what I chose to do from that moment on is a whole nother thing. But you have a moment that I think most white people, unless they exist in a predominantly, Black environment, or if they exist in a predominantly Asian environment, they're not going to have that because the world is conformed to their view.
Yeah.
I
think it's, it is one, I would have loved to hang out with childhood Pilar, because that you were fun out on the playground. But
I was a total nerd, man. Total nerd. So not only was I the only Black kid, I was literally the kid who was just like with my glasses. Hello, what's going on? So.
Got your stack of books and
my little stack of books.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I look back to just, the past decades and just the different phases I went through, in embracing my Japanese-ness and then trying to distance myself. There were definitely periods of my life where I tried to distance myself from the label of Japanese or immigrant or Asian, and just try to blend, again, the blending in thing. And then that's long in my past, which is good. It wasn't until I was an adult that I appreciated being bilingual, or appreciated that people are crazy about sushi and ramen now. But if I brought raw fish around friends when I was 10. It was gross.
It's like, oh my gosh. They're like, what are you eating? And you're like,
yeah. And like my dad laughs about it. He's just like, all these, look who's trendy now. But back then we were the weirdos.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I feel like these issues of diversity, we could talk about them forever. And particularly, the issues of diversity within trail running and running, there is work to do. I really appreciate your point that spaces that wish to be more, quote unquote, inclusive and or diverse, I prefer the term equitable, that they need to be intentional. And I feel like there needs to be some reverse engineering of what does it mean to show up in this space? What does that mean for folks who are showing up, and do the work around making sure that people can feel comfortable. So in the interest of this fantastic conversation that we have had, if you had a piece of advice that you have ever been given, or if there's advice that you would like to give, what would it be?
Oh, advice. I think, this is something my dad tries to remind me, because people have opinions. Family members have opinions. Strangers have opinions.
That's right.
But for him, he always is like, do you feel okay about it? If you feel okay about it, like, screw what everyone else thinks, And I think, I have relatives in Japan who don't really get sometimes my lifestyle or my solo adventures as a woman. But he's kind of like, if you're not worried about it, then don't worry about what other people think. And I think that also applies to showing up in spaces. That part I feel like I'm still needing to, like, I don't know, find the bravery to step into certain spaces, but it's getting a little bit better. Like, I gotta figure it out somehow. But just be okay. Like, just be okay with yourself, and that is enough, right? That is enough. And my dad reminds me that, because people are judgy.
That's right. I love that. I think that's great advice. We're all judging each other. I'm judging myself.
Yeah, my dad is like, he's a man of very few words, but he's just like, he is very much the you do you kind of attitude, and that is enough.
I love it.
I try to remind myself that when I feel like, the imposter syndrome coming up, or if I look around and I'm counting how many people of color there are, he's going to be like, it's fine. It's okay. It's enough. If you're okay with it, if you're okay being there, then be there.
I love that. Ayako, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
It's good to see you again and chat. I feel like the other time too, we were like, we can just talk for 3 more hours. But,
Totally. I'd like to take a moment to thank Ayako for joining me on the show today. Ayako, thank you for sharing your insights and thoughts on diversifying start lines in trail running and in outdoor adventures and spaces in general. We had a really great conversation, so thanks again for joining me. For you, my dear listeners, if you would like to connect with Ayako, I will put information in the show notes on how to connect with her through Instagram. Join me here again next week for the next episode of the Last 10th podcast.